Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second part of the laws of counting the Omer, Sefirat HaOmer. We started this last week, and we're going to finish this off today. And we're going to look at Sefirat HaOmer and women, which is, can women count the Omer, or more specifically, can women make the bracha for Sefirat HaOmer? Can they make the blessing? So to understand this, we need to understand a few fundamentals. The first is that the mitzvah of counting the Omer is time-bound. It's mitzvat aseh shehazeman grama. And if it's time-bound, the Gemara has told us that women are exempt generally from time-bound mitzvot. There's a few exceptions, but generally women are exempt from time-bound mitzvot. And this would be one of those normal cases where women are exempt. If a person is exempt, the question is, can they choose to take upon themselves to make the bracha? Is that considered a praiseworthy act? Or is that considered a bracha she'ena tzricha, a bracha that is not required, and therefore could be considered a bracha levatala, a blessing in vain, and therefore not only is it not something you can do, it's actually very problematic to do. So if we look at the codification of this law, we're going to see this here. And let's do the brief introduction here. It says, according to nearly all opinions, Sefirat HaOmer is considered mitzvat aseh shehazeman grama, a time-bound mitzvah. Since women are normally exempt from fulfilling time-bound mitzvot, which is a Mishnah in Masechet Kiddushin, women are also exempt from counting the Omer. However, women should be permitted to fulfill the mitzvah should they so desire. So it's fine, if a woman wants to count, that's fine. Nevertheless, what about the bracha? According to the Shulchan Aruch, the context of women reciting a bracha, we can learn this out from other mitzvot which are time-bound, such as a woman listening to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. There, women can listen to the shofar, however, we don't make a special bracha for them. That's a Sephardic approach. Whereas the Ramah of Moshe Isserles, quoting the Ashkenazic approach, says, women can recite a bracha on the shofar. We see that here. Afal pi shenashim peturot, even though women are exempt, yecholot litkoa, we are able, or they are able to blow the shofar. And also, we are able to blow for them. Aval en mevarachot, we do not make a bracha for them, or they do not make the bracha. Is more precise, v'lo yivarachu lahen, and we should not bless, we should make the bracha on their behalf. So Maran is very clear. When it comes to shofar, women can hear the shofar, you can even have a special blowing for women. However, neither the women nor the man blowing the shofar should make a bracha. Whereas the Ramah is very different. He says, haminhag, the customs as follows: Shehanashim mevarchot mitzvot aseh shehazeman grama. Women do make the bracha on time-bound mitzvot. Alken gam kan mevarchot latzman. So too here they can make the bracha for themselves. They can make this blessing for themselves. So therefore, if I looked at no other sources, I would say straightforward. For Sephardic women, count the Omer, just no bracha. Ashkenaziot ladies, count the Omer with a bracha. And that is indeed the way that we could learn it. It says as follows: when it comes to Sefirat HaOmer, he adds, there is an additional question to address. Is an Ashkenazic woman permitted to begin reciting a bracha daily if she may potentially forget to count one night? Okay, remember we said last time that for a man, even if he may forget to count one night, we still, and even if we know he's forgetful, we say, no, he begins as an Adam Kasher, and therefore he makes the bracha until he forgets. At first glance, one might argue that since we explained above that men are permitted to recite a bracha, as like I just said, despite the possibility that they miss a day, the halacha for women should be exactly the same. But on the other hand, since women are not obligated in this mitzvah, perhaps we should say that this is more appropriate not to take a chance. Moreover, perhaps there is also more of a chance that women will forget than men, since most women do not attend daily minyan. So what am I going to say here? If I say, for Sfaradiot, there's not much to say, because for Sfaradiot, we never make a bracha on time-bound mitzvot. But for Ashkenaziot, when do we say they can make the bracha? When it's a one-time thing, like hearing the shofar, or hearing the Megillah, or taking the lulav. But here, every night, perhaps they'll forget one night, and not only that, women generally don't say arvit or ma'ariv, and so therefore, I could say another reason to be strict to say, for Ashkenaziot, not to make the bracha even in this case. The Magen Avraham, one of the commentaries to the Shulchan Aruch, writes, although women are technically piturot, exempt from the mitzvah, they have nevertheless accepted upon themselves to fulfill it. And this would seem to imply that he holds they may even make a bracha. As he writes here, Nashim pturot mesfirat dahave mitzvat aseh shezman grama, mihu kava shevivu alayhu chova. But what's the issue here? Since they've already accepted upon themselves as an obligation, it's as if they are obligated, and therefore we make it that they can make a bracha. Again, for Ashkenaziot. As I said, for Sfaradiot, very simple. You do it, you can do it, but we don't make neither they should make the bracha, nor we should make the bracha for them. Okay. This statement of the Magen Avraham is quoted by a number of the later Achronim, by the Behetev, the Chok Yaakov, and even the Mishnah Berurah. However, the Mishnah Berurah then notes that in his time, most women did not count the Omer. So 100 years ago, the minhag in Ashkenaz, in Poland, was that women did not count the Omer. And there adds, according to the Sefer Shulchan Shlomo, even if they do count, they should not make a beracha, since they will likely miss a night. And he adds here, most do not understand the meaning of what they are saying. He writes, and again, this is the Mishnah Berurah writing 100 years ago. Doesn't mean that it's what it is today. He says, Katava Magen Avraham, miu gava shaviu alayhu chava. He quotes the Magen Avraham who says that women have taken it upon themselves as an obligation. But he says, but in our countries now, what was true for the Magen Avraham in 17th century Poland, in 19th century Poland, it had already changed. Okay, women do not count. In 19th century and early 20th century Poland, it had already changed. And he writes in the Sefer Shulchan Shlomo, De'al kol panim lo yivarchu. These women should not count with a beracha, because they're for sure going to make a mistake on one of the days. V'gam al pirov, the majority of these women, einam yodeim perush hamilot. They don't know the meaning of the words that they're saying. Now, we now have a machloket, what was going on in the 17th century in Poland to what was going on in the late 19th, early 20th century in Poland. But now, in the 21st century, we know that women understand the words that they're saying. And we know that in the Ashkenazic world, many women are accustomed to count the Omer. So therefore, some of the contemporary Ashkenazic poskim, such as the Stipler Gaon and Rav Yaakov Kanievsky, have said that women today can be reminded and should make the beracha. It says here in Orchot Rabbeinu, in the home of our teacher and rabbi, the stipler, the women would count Sefirat HaOmer. Our teacher and rabbi would mention to his spouse, the rabbinit, and to his daughters and granddaughters that they should count. Okay? Now, going back to the Sephardic approach, the Yalkut Yosef, as Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef, quoting his father, Hacham Ovadia, gives another reason why women should not count. Other than we don't do it because Maran says we don't do it, Yalkut Yosef says here, Nashim p'turot mimitzvah tzvat ha'omer, ho'il v'yesh la zman kavua. The reason why women are exempt is because it has a fixed time. V'kol mitzvah aseh shazman grama. Nashim p'turot, and every time bal mitzvah, women are exempt. V'im ratzu lispor bli bracha, rashaot. And if they want to count without making a bracha, they are permitted. Aval einan rashaot levarech. They are not permitted to make a bracha. Shehi bracha levatala, because it is considered a bracha in vain. Ve'al pi hasod, and according to Kabbalistic tradition, tov shanashim lo tisperenu klal haomer. And according to Kabbalah, it's better that women don't count the Omer at all. Af beli bracha, even without a bracha. And he leaves it at that without explaining what's going on, okay? The footnote says here, this idea is mentioned in the Zohar and in the writings of the Arizal, but they don't go into it. So let's see what we've seen so far. What we've seen so far is, for Ashkenaziyot, for Ashkenazic women, it would seem they have what to rely on. It seems to be the established custom in the time of the Ramah, in the time of Magen Avraham, that they can do it. And even though the Mishnah Berurah was concerned in the late 19th, early 20th century, it seems that by now, women in the Ashkenazic world are accustomed to doing this. And so many in modern Orthodox circles and Haredi circles, if you're Ashkenazi, it's common for the women to count. Whereas for Sephardiot, for Sephardic ladies, since we consider it a beracha levatala, a beracha in vain, there's nothing to talk about. You just don't make the beracha. And some women count without a beracha, and some women don't count at all. And the reason why they don't count at all is because of this Kabbalistic reason brought down there by the Yalkut Yosef in the name of the Zohar. Now, what about children? Should children make a beracha? Like other mitzvot that are performed by children who have reached the age of chinuch, a child should count the Omer with a bracha as well. What happens if the child forgets to count one day? May he continue to count with a bracha due to considerations of chinuch, even though an adult would no longer recite a beracha. What do we say here? And again, when we say children, I'm going to be politically incorrect. It's obviously talking about boys, because if adult women aren't allowed to make a beracha, then certainly girls under bat mitzvah shouldn't be making a beracha. So here, the Yalkut Yosef says, mitzvah lechanech et haktanim. It is a mitzvah to educate the young boys. Lispor et ha'omer, to count the omer, bechol yom, each and every day. V'yesh lechancham lispor im bracha kedat. And we should educate them to count with a beracha properly. V'katan sheshachach lispor eze laila b'mei asfira. And if the child forgot to count a particular night of the Omer, rashai lehamshich. He is permitted to continue lispor b'bracha, to count with a bracha. Why? Mishum chinuch, because of education. Kedei lahargilo levarech. So he shall be accustomed to make the bracha b'chol shana, each and every year, lekashe yagdil, once he becomes bar mitzvah. On the other hand, Rav Tzvi Kohen in a sefer called Sefirat HaOmer writes, a child should not continue with the bracha if he forgets one night. Shuv eno moneh b'shana zo b'bracha, kedin gadol, we should treat him like an adult. Im eno yodea levarech, mutar lelamdo et nusach habracha. And if he doesn't know how to make the bracha, one is permitted to teach him the text of the bracha, af al pi shedileg, even though he missed the night. Another interesting question that arises concerning a child counting the Omer is, what happens if he becomes bar mitzvah during this period of time? Do we say that since his new count as an adult, which is a full obligation, is not complete, he may no longer recite the bracha? Or do we say that since he has counted the entire count consecutively, it makes no difference whether he was obligated as a child, as an adult, or a child? So you might think, Rabbi, this isn't a question. If the boy has been doing well as a 12 and 3/4-year-old or whatever, not even 12 and 3/4, almost 13, and he was doing it properly, let him continue. Well, this question is actually brought in the Minchat Chinuch. And the Minchat Chinuch writes, Ach ani mesupak. I'm actually uncertain. Im hakatan, with a child, afa pi she'eno chayav, even though he's not obligated, mikol manam, mana kederech ktanim. Nevertheless, should nevertheless count like the children. Uve'emta nitgadel hakatan, but if in the middle the child becomes bar mitzvah, v'nishtachrer ha'eved, or similarly, if a slave is freed, is he obligated from the Torah to count now that he is bar mitzvah, or when he converts or becomes free? You could answer this question about a ger as well. What is the din? Do we say the matter depends on the obligation or exemption? And since he was exempt, even though he counted, nevertheless, since it is one mitzvah, and before that he was not obligated, here and now also he is not obligated from the Torah? Or Dilma, or perhaps since he counted, even though he was exempt, nevertheless the calculation is not cancelled, and he is still obligated from here and onwards. Guess what? The Mitzvah Chinuch does not answer. He says, I'm unsure. According to many poskim, including the Aruch HaShulchan and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, one may continue to count with a bracha, and this is a generally accepted practice for the Ashkenazim. A child who became of age during the days of Sefirat continues to count Sefirat with a bracha. This is in accordance with the poskim who hold that even those who hold that the whole Sefirat is one mitzvah, one who missed one day can no longer count. What he counted when he was a child is still considered Sefirat for this matter. But Chacham Ovadia Yosef says no, he may not continue to count with the bracha. He says, the Masechet Rosh Hashanah, as it explains, the one who performs a mitzvah at a time that he is exempt from it, and then became a chiyuv, he became obligated again, he must perform it again. And the Gaon Maharam ben Chaviv, in his Kuntrus Yom Teruah, writes, the same is true for a child who performed a mitzvah and then became of age. Since he did it at a time that he was exempt, all that he did is not considered anything, and he is obligated to do it again with a bracha. Even though the child counted when he was a child, since he was exempt from the mitzvah at that time, his counting is meaningless from a halachic sense, and it emerges that there is no temimut. We have no complete days. Therefore, he counts from the day that he became bar mitzvah without a beracha. Okay? So to understand this, exactly what's going on here, we're saying, by a child, what's the main reason why he's counting with the beracha? L'shem chinuch, to educate him, so when he becomes bar mitzvah, he knows what he's doing. Now, can a child under bar mitzvah fulfill the obligation of an adult, male? Absolutely not. Therefore, since he was not in a position to fulfill the obligation of another adult male, how can he fulfill his own obligation of counting 49 full days? He cannot. And so therefore, like the woman, where it's considered a bracha levatala, a bracha in vain, Chacham Ovadia Yosef considered the same thing. It's another bracha levatala. And so therefore, the child should not do it if he becomes bar mitzvah. I remember when I first learned this halacha, and quite a few years ago, and I had a young boy turning bar mitzvah, and he was so excited. He'd prepared and he'd learned, and he'd been making the bracha every night. And I told him, and the first thing you're going to do as a bar mitzvah is not make a bracha. And he was so upset. And I remember that I was sitting with him and explaining that of all the times where you would think, now I'm a bar mitzvah, I've got more things I can do. And it's almost like a quiz question. What's the one time someone who turns bar mitzvah has one less bracha to make? It's this one. He doesn't get to make Sefirat HaOmer. And so therefore, we take him off. Now, how do we do Sefirat HaOmer? Do we do it standing up or sitting down? Says the Rosh, as we know, V'chi mevarachim me'umad. We do it standing up. The Tana Rabbanan, Bakama tachel hispor, al tikri bakama, ela bekoma. Don't read it as standing grain. Read it as standing up. And so therefore, tzarich lispor me'umad levarech techila. One needs to count standing up and to fulfill the beracha. Okay? One needs to make and one makes the beracha beforehand. The Mishnah Berurah says, one needs to stand while making the bracha. But after the fact, if one did count sitting down, one still fulfilled the obligation. Now, one more thing. Have you noticed there's something called a leshem yichud that we do before certain brachot? Now the question is Sefirat HaOmer Doraita or Dorabanan? Is it a Torah level mitzvah or rabbinic? And we noticed that last week it was a bit of a machloket with virtually all the commentaries, all the Rishonim saying it was only rabbinic. Therefore, how can we say this L'Shem Yichud? Therefore, the Yalkut Yosef writes, one should omit the words L'Shem Yichud, Shelifnei Sefirat HaOmer, Hareinu Ba'im Lekayem Mitzvat Aseh Shel Sefirat HaOmer. Behold, we are coming to fulfill the positive mitzvah of counting the Omer. Kamoshe Katuv B'Torah, as it's written in the Torah, Usfartem Lachem, and you shall count for yourselves. You don't say that. Me'acher Sefirat HaOmer B'Zman Hazeh Midrabanan. Why? Because Sefirat HaOmer today is only rabbinic, because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash to offer the Korban Omer. Others, however, such as the Piskei Teshuvot, they say it's okay. And he says as follows, some have resolved the custom to say the L'Shem Yichud of the Mitzvah Taseh, because we wait for the coming of Mashiach every day. And hopefully the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt soon. And we will merit this before Shavuot. And we'll offer the Shtei HaLechem and the Mitzvah Sefirat HaOmer that we counted will be considered D'oraita retroactively, lemafreya. And so therefore, he says, it's a very nice idea actually, from rather than thinking Mashiach's going to come one day, it's saying, even during the Omer, even when right now it's the Rabbanan, perhaps it will be considered D'oraita, be considered a Torah level retroactively. According to the suggestion, we are declaring that we have intent to perform the mitzvah, which we hope will be transformed into a D'oraita one before the end of the counting period. It's a very nice idea. I think it's more of a drush than a halachic one, but it's nice nonetheless. Counting days and weeks. What units of numbers must one use to count the Omer? According to Gemara Menachot, one should count both the days that have passed as well as the weeks that have passed. As it says, Gufa Amar Baye, mitzvah le'amne yomeh. It's a mitzvah to count the days. U'mitzvah le'miyamne shvu'eh. It's also a mitzvah to count the weeks. Rabbanan debei Rav Ashi manu yomeh u'manu shvu'eh. And the sages of the house of Rav Ashi, they counted the days and the weeks. Amema mane yomeh v'lo mane shvu'eh. Amema would count the days, but not the weeks. Amar zecher le'mikdash hu. He said, why? Why did he only count the days but not the weeks? Because he wanted to do it zecher le'mikdash. Therefore, one does not need to be so scrupulous to count both days and weeks. He wanted almost to like make it a heker between this is still a rabbinic mitzvah, not a doraita, not a Torah one, and therefore I won't do it days and weeks. However, when it comes to halacha, as you know from how we count the Omer, we follow it like the days and the weeks. As a sofer hayamim v'hashivot, we count the days and the weeks. Ketzad, says Maran, Bayom Rishon Omer, Hayom Yom Echad. Today is the first day. Okay. And interesting, the Ashkenazim, they say Ba Omer, whereas we Sfardim say La Omer, until he reaches the seventh day. And then he says Hayom Shiv'a Yamim, Shehem Shavua Echad. Today's the seventh day, making 1 week. And then today's the eighth day, which is 8 days, which is 1 week and 1 day, until he reaches the 14th day, which he says 2 weeks, etc., until he reaches 49. Okay? And that's how we do it. He says, very interesting, he says, Rova poskim hanusach la omer. The best way to do it is to say la omer, and that's only lechatchila. But that's the way that we Sfaradim do it, and some Ashkenazim do it too. It's la omer. Okay. But it wouldn't be a problem if one said ba omer or be omer. But again, the way that we do it is la omer. Now, counting Sefirat by mistake. What happens if someone asks which day the Sefirat is, and another person answers that it is the day? And I'm not even going to look at this example. I don't want to get too complicated. Has the second person fulfilled his obligation merely by answering the question? And may he not subsequently count Sefirat with the bracha. So if someone says to me, and I'm going to give you a different day, what's today's Omer? And I tell them the day, which is today, I may have already counted and therefore messed myself up, and therefore I wouldn't be allowed to make the bracha. It says here in the Shulchan Aruch, Yesh Omrim, she'en mitzvot tzrichot kavana, since mitzvot don't require intent, v'yesh omrim she'tzrichot kavana, and some say that they do require kavana, b'asiyat ota mitzvah, b'hen halacha. The Shulchan Aruch rules that ideally one should respond by informing the person what the count was on the previous day, as otherwise one may not recite the bracha. It says, Misha sho'el oto chavero. If his friend asks him, bein hashmashot, in the evening, between sunset and 3 stars coming out, kama yemei asfira b'zeh halayla, what's tonight's count? Yomar lo, he should say to him, etmol haya kach v'kach, yesterday was so and so. Okay? She'im yomar lo, because if you will say to him, hayom kach v'kach, today is so and so, eno yachol lachzor le'minot b'bracha, he would not be able to return and count with the bracha. But kodem ben hashmashot, but if it's before sunset, kivan she'ein zman sfira, since it's not the time for counting, and bekach klum, there is no issue whatsoever. Okay, so I could even explain to you what's going on, but I like to be a little bit whatever. So I could say, you know what, today, meaning what we counted yesterday, is 22. And you can figure out what tonight is. I'm not going to tell you that, okay? And therefore, that's on issue. There's a whole question here that if I didn't say Hayom, if I just give you the number, is that okay? Can he still make the bracha? You can have a look here on your own on some of these last ones. I generally think it's better just to remember not to do it this way and to tell the person this is what it was yesterday, and you don't need to get yourself stuck whether did I just count by mistake and therefore I don't make the bracha or not. It's just best not to get into that situation. All right, we'll stop here, and next time we'll go on to a new topic. Have a wonderful